The night was quiet, the kind of calm that made small towns like Pinecrest feel safe and predictable. The streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by or a dog barking in the distance. It was one of those nights where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But sometimes, even on the calmest nights, things can take a sudden and unexpected turn. Officer Ryan Blake sat in his patrol car at the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue. He sipped from a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His eyes scanned the area lazily, not really expecting much to happen. Ryan wasn't known for being friendly, nor was he particularly well-liked in the community. People often whispered about him behind his back, saying he had a short temper and didn't treat everyone fairly. Some even claimed they felt uneasy when he pulled them over during traffic stops. But Ryan didn't care what others thought. He believed he was doing his job, enforcing the law the way it needed to be enforced. As he leaned back in his seat, his radio crackled to life. Dispatch reported a possible speeding vehicle heading east on Maple Street. Without hesitation, Ryan grabbed his flashlight, turned on his siren, and sped off down the road. A chase, no matter how minor, always gave him a sense of purpose. A few minutes later, he spotted the car, a sleek black sedan driving just slightly above the speed limit. He signaled for the driver to pull over, and after a moment's hesitation, the car slowed down and came to a stop near the curb. Ryan stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his belt as he walked toward the sedan. He couldn't see much through the tinted windows, which annoyed him. He liked having control over situations, and anything that blocked his view made him uneasy. When he reached the driver's side window, he tapped on it with his flashlight. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a woman sitting behind the wheel. She looked calm, almost too calm for someone who had just been pulled over by the police. Her name was Maya Johnson, though Ryan didn't know that yet. All he saw was a black woman with an air of confidence that irritated him more than he cared to admit. "License and registration," Ryan said sharply, barely glancing at her face. His tone was dismissive, as if he'd already decided she was guilty of something before she could say a word. Maya nodded politely and reached into her glove compartment to retrieve the requested documents. She kept her movements slow and deliberate, knowing how quickly misunderstandings could escalate during encounters like this. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly, her voice steady and measured. Ryan frowned. Something about her demeanor rubbed him the wrong way. Most people would be nervous or apologetic when pulled over, but Maya seemed unfazed. To him, it felt like defiance. He took the license and registration from her hand without thanking her and stepped back to examine them under the glow of his flashlight. As he read her information, his irritation grew. Everything appeared to be in order. No expired tags, no outstanding warrants. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "You were speeding," Ryan stated flatly, though he knew full well that her speed hadn't been excessive enough to warrant a ticket. He wanted to assert his authority, to remind her who was in charge here. "I don't believe I was," Maya replied evenly, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only patience. "If you check your dashboard camera, you'll see I was within the legal limit." Her composure only fueled Ryan's frustration. He hated being questioned, especially by someone he thought should show him more respect. In his mind, people like her were always looking for excuses, always trying to wiggle their way out of trouble. He clenched his jaw and leaned closer to the open window, his posture aggressive. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snapped, his voice rising. "I'm the one enforcing the law here, not you." Maya blinked, surprised by his hostility but unwilling to let it rattle her. She had dealt with difficult people before, both in her personal life and in her professional career. Though Ryan didn't know it, Maya wasn't just an ordinary citizen. She was an undercover FBI agent working on a sensitive case involving organized crime. Her presence in Pinecrest wasn't random. She had been gathering evidence against a local syndicate suspected of laundering money and trafficking drugs. But tonight, none of that mattered. All Ryan saw was a black woman refusing to cower before him. "Officer," Maya began, choosing her words carefully, "I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you, I wasn't breaking any laws." If you'd like to review the footage from your own car, I'm happy to wait while you do so. Ryan bristled at her suggestion. Did she think she could tell him how to do his job? Who did she think she was, talking to him like that? His grip tightened on his flashlight, and for a brief moment he considered letting her go just to get rid of her. But then another thought crossed his mind, one fueled by years of ingrained prejudice and unchecked anger. What if she wasn't just some ordinary woman? What if she was hiding something? Without warning, Ryan yanked the car door open and demanded, "Step out of the vehicle." Maya hesitated, confused by the sudden escalation. "Why?" she asked, her voice still calm despite the tension in the air. "What's the issue?" "I said step out," Ryan barked, his patience wearing thin. When Maya didn't move immediately, he grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her out of the car. She stumbled slightly but managed to regain her balance. For a split second, fear flickered in her eyes, not because of Ryan himself, but because of what might happen next. She knew all too well how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. "Let go of me," Maya said firmly, trying to pull her arm free. "You're hurting me." But Ryan wasn't listening anymore. His mind was clouded with anger and suspicion, and in that moment he stopped seeing Maya as a person. Instead, he saw a threat, a challenge to his authority. Before either of them realized what was happening, Ryan reached for his gun. The sound of the weapon being drawn echoed in the stillness of the night. "Don't move," he shouted, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Maya froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She raised her hands slowly, palms facing outward to show she meant no harm. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly now. "This isn't necessary, I'm not resisting." But Ryan wasn't hearing her. In his mind, everything had already been decided. He squeezed the trigger, and the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Maya cried out as the bullet struck her shoulder, sending her collapsing to the ground. Pain shot through her body, and for a moment all she could do was lie there, stunned and gasping for breath. Ryan stood over her, his chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Only then did reality begin to sink in. What had he done? Why had he reacted so violently? Panic set in as he glanced around, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. No witnesses, just him and the woman bleeding on the pavement. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, finally, Ryan holstered his weapon and called for backup. As he waited for the ambulance to arrive, he stared down at Maya, his expression unreadable. Whether it was guilt, fear, or regret, it was impossible to tell. All he knew was that nothing would ever be the same again, for either of them, and somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of denial and defensiveness, Ryan wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its flashing lights piercing the quiet night. Paramedics rushed to Maya's side, assessing her injuries with practiced efficiency. She was conscious, but in pain, clutching her shoulder as blood soaked through her shirt. One of the paramedics gently reassured her, telling her she would be okay while they worked to stabilize her. Maya nodded weakly, trying to focus on their words instead of the throbbing ache in her body. As the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher and into the ambulance, Ryan stood nearby, watching silently. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but his posture betrayed his unease. He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to appear out of nowhere and accuse him of wrongdoing. The street was still empty except for the police cars that had arrived after his call for backup. Officers milled about, some taking statements from Ryan, others cordoning off the area with yellow tape. Inside the ambulance, Maya closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. Her mind raced with questions. Why had this happened? What had she done to provoke such a reaction? And most importantly, how could she protect herself now? As an undercover FBI agent, she knew better than anyone how delicate her position was. If word got out about who she really was, it could jeopardize not only her investigation, but also the lives of those involved. For now, though, she decided to keep her identity hidden. Let them think she was just another civilian caught in a bad situation. At the hospital, doctors and nurses sprang into action. They wheeled Maya into the emergency room where she underwent surgery to remove the bullet lodged in her shoulder. The procedure went smoothly, and by morning she was resting in a private room. Her brother Marcus arrived soon after hearing the news. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm demeanor, the kind of person who always seemed to know what to say in difficult situations. When he walked into the room and saw Maya lying there, pale and bandaged, his face darkened with anger. "What happened?" Marcus demanded, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Who did this to you?" Maya hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. She trusted Marcus completely, but even he didn't know the full extent of her work with the FBI. Still, she owed him the truth, or at least part of it. "I was pulled over last night," she began softly. "The officer, he thought I was speeding, but I wasn't. Things escalated quickly, and before I knew it, he shot me." Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. "What do you mean, things escalated? Did you resist? Did you give him a reason to—" "No," Maya interrupted firmly. "I didn't do anything wrong. I followed every instruction he gave me. But he lost control." Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, the memory of the incident still fresh in her mind. Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. We have to report this. This can't go unpunished." Maya placed a hand on his arm to calm him. "It won't," she said quietly. "Trust me, Marcus, justice will be served." She didn't elaborate, but her tone carried a weight that made Marcus pause. Whatever she had planned, he knew better than to push her for details. Maya was smart, resourceful, and fiercely determined. If anyone could turn this nightmare into something meaningful, it was her. Meanwhile, news of the shootings spread like wildfire. A passerby had recorded part of the incident on their phone and uploaded the video to social media. Within hours, it went viral, sparking outrage across the country. People watched in horror as Ryan yanked Maya out of her car and drew his weapon, without apparent cause. Comments flooded in, condemning Ryan's actions and calling for accountability. Protesters gathered outside the police station in Pinecrest, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya" and "End police brutality." Back at the precinct, Ryan found himself under intense scrutiny. His superiors suspended him pending an investigation, citing concerns about his conduct during the traffic stop. Internal affairs officers grilled him for hours, asking him to explain why he had resorted to lethal force so quickly. Ryan struggled to defend himself, his answers growing increasingly defensive and disjointed. He claimed he had felt threatened, that Maya's refusal to comply with his orders had left him no choice. But the leaked body cam footage told a different story, one that painted Ryan as reckless and unnecessarily aggressive. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, interviewing residents of Pinecrest and experts on police reform. Many pointed out Ryan's history of complaints filed against him, including allegations of racial profiling and excessive force. Others highlighted systemic issues within law enforcement, arguing that cases like this were all too common. The public demanded answers, and federal authorities stepped in to ensure transparency and fairness in the investigation. For Maya, recovering in her hospital room, the attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of her or get a statement. Friends and acquaintances called nonstop, offering support and expressing their shock. Even strangers sent messages of encouragement, thanking her for enduring something no one should ever have to face. While grateful for the outpouring of kindness, Maya couldn't help but feel uneasy. She hadn't asked for this spotlight, and she worried it might complicate her plans moving forward. One afternoon, a federal prosecutor named Lisa Carter visited Maya in her room. Lisa was a petite woman with sharp features and an air of authority. She introduced herself and explained that she was leading the case against Ryan. "We're building a strong case," Lisa said confidently, "but we need your cooperation. Are you willing to testify?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Yes," she replied firmly, "whatever it takes." Lisa nodded approvingly. "Good. Your testimony will be crucial. In the meantime, we'll gather as much evidence as possible. The body cam footage is damning, but we want to make sure we cover all our bases." Over the next few days, Maya worked closely with Lisa and her team, providing detailed accounts of the incident and sharing insights into Ryan's behavior. She described how he had treated her differently from the start, making assumptions based on her race rather than her actions. Lisa listened intently, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. By the time they finished, Maya felt confident that justice would prevail, at least in this case. But Maya's thoughts often drifted to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about Ryan. It was about a system that allowed people like him to abuse their power with impunity. As an FBI agent, she understood the complexities of dismantling such a system. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it certainly wouldn't be easy. But if her ordeal could shine a light on these issues and inspire change, then perhaps it wouldn't be in vain. By the end of the week, Maya was discharged from the hospital. Her shoulder still ached, and she wore a sling to keep it immobilized. But she was determined to stay active. She attended community meetings, spoke at rallies, and met with activists working to reform policing practices. Each time she stood in front of a crowd, sharing her story and urging others to demand accountability, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Ryan, on the other hand, retreated further into isolation. Suspended without pay and facing mounting legal fees, he spent most of his time alone, consumed by guilt and fear. He avoided watching the news or scrolling through social media, unable to bear the backlash directed at him. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to escape it, the reality of what he had done lingered in the back of his mind. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the weeks turned into months, the case against Ryan gained momentum. Evidence continued to pile up, painting an undeniable picture of misconduct and bias. Federal investigators uncovered texts and emails exchanged between Ryan and fellow officers, revealing racist remarks and derogatory language. These discoveries shocked even those who had suspected Ryan of harboring prejudiced views. The prosecution added these findings to their arsenal, ensuring that Ryan would face the full weight of the law. Through it all, Maya remained steadfast. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Across the country, people rallied behind her, using her story as a catalyst for change. From lawmakers proposing new legislation to grassroots organizations organizing protests, the movement grew stronger with each passing day. And at the center of it all was Maya, a survivor, a fighter, and a symbol of hope. Though scars remained, both physical and emotional, Maya refused to let them define her. Instead, she focused on the future, determined to create a world where no one else would have to endure what she had. For now, that meant testifying in court, exposing the truth, and holding Ryan accountable. But beyond that, it meant continuing the fight for justice, equality, and reform. And as she looked out at the crowds cheering her name, Maya knew she was ready. As the investigation into Ryan Blake's actions deepened, Maya Johnson found herself at the center of a storm that reached far beyond Pinecrest. The case had become a national conversation, with people from all walks of life weighing in on issues of police accountability, systemic racism, and the need for reform. For Maya, this was both empowering and overwhelming. She had always been driven by a desire to make a difference, but she hadn't expected her own suffering to become the spark for such widespread change. One morning, as Maya sat in her living room scrolling through news articles about the case, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Lisa Carter, the federal prosecutor handling Ryan's trial. "Maya," Lisa began without preamble, "we've uncovered something important, and I think you should know about it." Maya straightened up, setting her phone on speaker so she could take notes if needed. "What is it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Lisa hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It seems Ryan wasn't acting entirely on his own that night. We've traced anonymous tips sent to his department in the days leading up to your traffic stop. Someone flagged your car specifically, describing it as suspicious and suggesting it might be linked to criminal activity." Maya frowned, her mind racing. "That doesn't make sense. I wasn't doing anything unusual. My presence in Pinecrest was part of my undercover work. I wasn't trying to draw attention to myself." I know, Lisa said quickly. And that's why we're digging deeper. These tips came from untraceable sources, which means whoever sent them didn't want to be identified. But here's the thing. The description they gave matches details only someone close to your operation would know. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had always suspected that the syndicate she was investigating might have eyes and ears everywhere, but this confirmed it. Someone inside or connected to the organization must have discovered her true identity, or at least suspected enough to target her indirectly. By feeding false information to local law enforcement, they had manipulated Ryan into making a fatal mistake. "Do you think they wanted me dead?" Maya asked quietly, her voice tinged with anger and disbelief. "It's possible," Lisa admitted, "or maybe they just wanted to intimidate you to send a message. Either way, it proves how dangerous these people are." "You can't let your guard down, Maya. Not even for a second." Maya nodded, though Lisa couldn't see her. She knew better than anyone the risks involved in undercover work, but this revelation took things to another level. Not only had she been shot because of one man's prejudice, but she had also become collateral damage in a much larger game of power and corruption. It made her furious, and more determined than ever to bring the syndicate down. Over the next few weeks, Maya worked tirelessly alongside Lisa and her team to piece together the puzzle. They reviewed surveillance footage, analyzed phone records, and interviewed key witnesses who might provide insight into the syndicate's operations. Slowly but surely, connections began to emerge. One name kept coming up: Victor Monroe, a wealthy businessman with ties to several high-profile criminal cases. Though never convicted, Monroe had long been suspected of orchestrating illegal activities under the guise of legitimate enterprises. Maya remembered hearing whispers about Monroe during her investigation. He was smart, calculating, and ruthless. Exactly. The kind of person who would use others to do his dirty work. If he had discovered her role as an FBI agent, it wouldn't surprise her if he had orchestrated the tip-off that led to her shooting. With this new information, Maya decided to step up her efforts. She met with her FBI handler, Agent Paul Dawson, to discuss the implications. Paul was a seasoned investigator with decades of experience, and he listened intently as Maya laid out her theory. "You're probably right about Monroe," Paul said after a moment of thought. "He's exactly the type to exploit situations like this, but proving it won't be easy. We'll need concrete evidence linking him to the tip-off and showing intent." "I understand," Maya replied, "but I'm not giving up until we have it. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about exposing a network of corruption that's been operating unchecked for years." Paul nodded approvingly. "All right. Let's focus on gathering everything we can. In the meantime, stay safe. If Monroe realizes we're onto him, he won't hesitate to strike back." Maya agreed, though she knew staying safe wouldn't be easy. Every move she made felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between uncovering the truth and avoiding retaliation. Still, she pressed forward, driven by a sense of purpose stronger than any fear. Meanwhile, public pressure continued to mount against Ryan Blake. His trial date was set, and the prosecution was building an ironclad case against him. In addition to the body cam footage and racially charged texts, investigators uncovered evidence of prior complaints filed against Ryan by other Black residents of Pinecrest. These accounts painted a disturbing pattern of behavior, reinforcing the argument that Ryan's actions toward Maya were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern of bias. Ryan, for his part, seemed to withdraw further into himself. Suspended from duty and facing mounting legal fees, he spent most of his time holed up in his apartment, avoiding contact with the outside world. Occasionally, he would meet with his attorney, a slick-talking man named Greg Miller, who assured him they could still win the case. But even Greg seemed less confident as the weeks went on, especially after learning about the extent of the evidence stacked against Ryan. "You need to prepare yourself," Greg told him during one of their meetings. "This isn't going to be an easy fight. The prosecution has a lot of ammunition, and the public sentiment is overwhelmingly against you." Ryan slumped in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he muttered. "I thought I was doing my job." Greg sighed. I believe you, Ryan, but perception matters. Right now, people see you as the face of everything wrong with policing. Your best bet is to show remorse and take responsibility. Maybe then we can salvage something." Ryan nodded reluctantly, though he wasn't sure he believed Greg's advice. How could he possibly fix what he had done? The weight of his guilt was crushing, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Maya lying on the ground, bleeding because of him. As the trial approached, Maya prepared to testify. She practiced her statements with Lisa, rehearsing every detail to ensure she conveyed the gravity of what had happened. At the same time, she continued working with the FBI to gather evidence against Victor Monroe. It was exhausting, juggling, two massive responsibilities, but Maya refused to slow down. She knew the stakes were too high. On the day before the trial, Maya received a package in the mail. Inside was a plain envelope containing a single sheet of paper. Written in block, letters was a chilling message. "Stop talking or you'll regret it." Maya's heart raced as she read the words over and over again. This was a threat, clear and unmistakable. Whoever had sent it knew exactly what buttons to push. Instead of letting fear consume her, Maya reported the incident to Paul immediately. "They're trying to scare me off," she said firmly. "But it's not going to work." Paul nodded grimly. "We'll increase your security measures. Don't go anywhere alone and keep your phone on you at all times. If they're willing to threaten you openly, they're desperate. That means we're getting close." Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. She had faced danger before, but this felt different. This was personal. And yet she reminded herself why she had chosen this path in the first place. Justice wasn't just a word. It was a promise, a commitment to stand up for those who couldn't, stand up for themselves. No amount of intimidation would stop her from fulfilling that promise. The following morning, Maya woke early, dressed carefully, and headed to the courthouse. Crowds had gathered outside, holding signs and chanting slogans demanding accountability. Reporters lined the steps, microphones at the ready, eager to capture her reaction. As she walked past them, flanked by security personnel, Maya kept her head held high. She knew the eyes of the nation were on her, watching and waiting to see whether justice would truly prevail. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Rows of spectators filled the benches, some there to support Maya, others curious about the outcome. Ryan sat stoically beside his attorney, his expression unreadable. When Maya took the stand, all eyes turned to her. She spoke clearly and calmly, recounting the events of that fateful night with precision and poise. Her testimony left little doubt about Ryan's misconduct and the underlying biases that had fueled his actions. By the end of the day, the courtroom erupted in murmurs as the judge adjourned the session. Outside, protests grew louder, echoing Maya's call for systemic change. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead was still long, but she could feel the tide beginning to turn. And somewhere in the shadows, Victor Monroe watched silently, his plans unraveling faster than he had anticipated. The trial of Ryan Blake unfolded over several weeks, each day bringing new testimonies, evidence, and revelations that kept the nation glued to their screens. The courtroom was packed every morning, with reporters scribbling notes, cameras rolling, and spectators leaning forward in anticipation. Maya Johnson sat quietly in the front row, her presence commanding respect even as she tried to remain calm. She knew this trial wasn't just about holding one man accountable. It was about exposing a flawed system and demanding change. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed smaller than ever. His once confident demeanor had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and mounting evidence against him. He avoided eye contact with Maya whenever she entered the room, his guilt evident in the way he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney, Greg Miller, did his best to defend him, but it was clear even to Ryan that the odds were stacked heavily against them. On the stand, witnesses recounted harrowing experiences with Ryan during traffic stops and routine interactions. A young black man named Jamal Carter described how Ryan had pulled him over for no apparent reason, searched his car without probable cause, and used racial slurs when Jamal questioned his authority. Another witness, an elderly woman named Ruth Harper, tearfully shared how Ryan had berated her for walking her dog too close to a crosswalk. calling her names and threatening to arrest her despite her compliance. Each testimony painted a clearer picture of Ryan's pattern of misconduct, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that his actions toward Maya were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader trend of prejudice and abuse of power. Lisa Carter, the federal prosecutor, presented these accounts methodically, weaving them into a narrative that left little room for doubt. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from the racially charged texts and emails discovered on Ryan's phone. These messages revealed a disturbing mindset, one filled with stereotypes, derogatory language, and disdain for people of color. Some texts even joked about using excessive force during arrests, boasting about intimidating troublemakers. When Lisa displayed these communications on a large screen in the courtroom, gasps rippled through the audience. Even the judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Owens, frowned deeply as she reviewed the material. Ryan's defense team tried to downplay the significance of the messages, arguing they were taken out of context or exaggerated by the prosecution. Greg Miller claimed Ryan was simply venting frustrations common among police officers dealing with difficult situations. But the jury didn't seem convinced. Their faces remained impassive, betraying no emotion as they absorbed the evidence. Maya took the stand again near the end of the trial, this time answering questions posed by Greg Miller during cross-examination. He attempted to undermine her credibility, suggesting she might have provoked Ryan or failed to follow instructions properly. "Isn't it true," Greg asked pointedly, "that you resisted Officer Blake's orders and refused to cooperate?" Maya met his gaze steadily, her voice unwavering. "No, that's not true," she replied. "I followed every instruction he gave me. I handed over my license and registration, I kept my hands visible, and I remained calm throughout the encounter." There was no justification for what happened. Greg pressed further, trying to find inconsistencies in her story. "You mentioned earlier that you felt threatened. Could it be possible that your perception of the situation was influenced by personal biases?" Lisa immediately objected, calling the question speculative and irrelevant. Judge Owens agreed, instructing the jury to disregard it. Maya, however, seized the opportunity to address the underlying implication. "Let me make something clear," she said firmly, looking directly at the jury. "This isn't about bias on my part. It's about bias on his. What happened that night wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was the result of systemic racism and unchecked prejudice within law enforcement. And if we don't confront these issues head-on, they'll keep happening, to me, to others like me, and to anyone who doesn't fit someone else's idea of who deserves respect." Her words resonated deeply, both inside and outside the courtroom. Spectators nodded in agreement while reporters scrambled to capture her statement verbatim. On social media, hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and on "End Systemic Racism" gained renewed momentum, amplifying calls for reform. Behind the scenes, Maya continued working tirelessly with the FBI to build a case against Victor Monroe. The anonymous tip-off linking her car to criminal activity had been traced back to a burner phone purchased under a fake name. While the trail ended there, investigators found connections between the phone's purchase location and businesses owned by Monroe. Surveillance footage showed one of Monroe's associates buying multiple prepaid devices around the same time, suggesting a coordinated effort to manipulate law enforcement. Paul Dawson, Maya's handler, updated her regularly on their progress. "We're closing in," he told her one evening after a long day in court. "Monroe's empire is built on layers of deception, but we're peeling them back one by one. It's only a matter of time before we have enough to bring him down." Maya nodded, though her expression remained cautious. "Just be careful, Paul. If Monroe realizes we're onto him, he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself, including silencing anyone who gets in his way." Paul assured her they were taking all necessary precautions, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at her. The threat she had received in the mail lingered in her mind, a stark reminder of the danger she faced. She doubled down on security measures, always traveling with escorts and avoiding predictable routines. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. This fight was bigger than her, and giving up was never an option. As the trial entered its final stages, closing arguments brought everything to a head. Lisa Carter delivered a powerful speech, summarizing the overwhelming evidence against Ryan and urging the jury to deliver a verdict that would send a message to the nation. "This is not just about one officer making a mistake," she said, passionately. "It's about accountability, transparency, and the urgent need for reform. We cannot continue to tolerate behavior that devalues human life based on race. Justice must be served not just for Maya Johnson, but for everyone who has suffered because of systemic injustice." Greg Miller countered with a plea for leniency, arguing that Ryan was a product of a broken system and deserved a second chance. "Mistakes were made," he admitted, "but does that mean we throw away a man's career? Does that mean we label him irredeemable? Let's not forget that Ryan Blake is human too. Flawed, yes, but capable of growth and change." When the closing statements concluded, the jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed, then days, as tension mounted both inside and outside the courthouse. Protesters gathered daily, holding vigils and chanting slogans. News outlets provided live updates, speculating about the outcome. Maya stayed home, surrounded by family and friends, steeling herself for whatever verdict awaited. Finally, on the third day of deliberation, the jury reached a decision. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Judge Owens called everyone to order. When the foreperson stood to announce the verdict, silence fell like a heavy curtain. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, pausing briefly for effect, "find the defendant, Ryan Blake, guilty on all counts." A wave of emotion swept through the room. Cheers erupted from supporters of Maya, while Ryan buried his face in his hands, visibly shaken. Judge Owens banged her gavel to restore order, her expression grim as she addressed the court. "Given the severity of the offense and the impact on the victim and society at large, I hereby sentence Ryan Blake to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 20 years in federal prison without parole." The announcement sent shockwaves across the country. For many, it marked a rare moment of accountability, a sign that justice could prevail, even in cases involving police misconduct. Celebrations broke out in cities nationwide, with people hugging, crying, and cheering in the streets. Social media lit up with messages of gratitude and hope, praising Maya for her courage and resilience. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. She felt relief knowing Ryan would face consequences for his actions, but she also recognized that the larger battle was far from over. Systemic racism and corruption ran deep, and dismantling them would require sustained effort and commitment. Still, the verdict gave her hope, a reminder that progress, however slow, was possible. That evening, Maya stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd of supporters who had gathered to celebrate the outcome. Her voice was steady, but filled with emotion as she spoke. "Today we achieved something important," she said, "but this is just the beginning. Real change won't happen overnight, and it won't happen unless we stay vigilant. We must hold our leaders accountable, demand better training and policies for law enforcement, and support those fighting for equality and justice. Together we can create a future where no one has to endure what I went through." The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name and waving signs high above their heads. As Maya stepped back from the podium, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. And somewhere in the shadows, Victor Monroe watched silently, his plans unraveling faster than he had anticipated. The verdict against Ryan Blake sent shockwaves through Pinecrest and the entire nation. For the first time in years, people dared to believe that justice could be served, even when it came to cases involving law enforcement. The streets buzzed with conversations about accountability, reform, and the possibility of change. Maya Johnson became a symbol of hope for many, her courage inspiring ordinary citizens to speak out against injustice. But while the public celebrated the trial's outcome, Maya knew the work was far from over. She couldn't rest, not when Victor Monroe still loomed in the background, pulling strings and orchestrating schemes from the shadows. The anonymous tip-off that had led to her shooting was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and Maya was determined to uncover the rest. Maya returned to her role as an undercover FBI agent with renewed focus. Her shoulder had healed enough for her to resume fieldwork, though she occasionally winced when lifting heavy objects or reaching too far. Physical pain was a small price to pay, she reminded herself, compared to the lives at stake if Monroe's operations continued unchecked. Her handler, Agent Paul Dawson, met with her regularly to review their progress. They worked out of a nondescript office tucked away in a quiet corner of Atlanta, its bland exterior masking the intensity of the operation inside. Maps, photos, and documents covered the walls, each item representing another thread in the web they were unraveling. "We're getting close," Paul said during one of their meetings. "Monroe's empire is built on layers of secrecy, but every layer we peel back exposes more vulnerabilities." Maya nodded, studying a photo of Monroe pinned to the wall. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a polished demeanor that made him seem trustworthy at first glance. But beneath the surface lay a ruthless businessman willing to do whatever it took to protect his interests. His network spanned multiple states, involving money laundering, drug trafficking, and even political corruption. Taking him down wouldn't be easy. But Maya wasn't afraid of hard work. One of the key breakthroughs came when investigators traced suspicious financial transactions to a series of shell companies linked to Monroe. These companies funneled millions of dollars into offshore accounts, effectively hiding illegal profits from authorities. Maya and her team spent countless hours analyzing bank records, piecing together the flow of money like detectives solving a complex puzzle. It was tedious work, but every detail brought them closer to exposing Monroe's crimes. Meanwhile, Maya kept a low profile outside of work. She avoided social media, stayed off the radar of reporters, and limited her public appearances to minimize the risk of drawing unwanted attention. Threats like the one she had received before the trial weighed heavily on her mind, reminding her that Monroe wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who posed a threat to his empire. Security escorts accompanied her everywhere, and her apartment was equipped with surveillance cameras and panic buttons. Despite these precautions, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Late at night, when the city fell silent, she would sit by her window and stare out at the dark streets below, wondering if someone was lurking in the shadows. Paranoia gnawed at her, but she refused to let it control her. If anything, it fueled her determination to see this mission through to the end. As weeks turned into months, the investigation gained momentum. One of Monroe's associates, a low-level enforcer named Carl Jenkins, was arrested during a routine traffic stop after officers discovered weapons and drugs in his car. Under pressure from federal agents, Jenkins agreed to cooperate, providing valuable information about Monroe's operations. According to Jenkins, Monroe had been planning a major shipment of cocaine set to arrive within days. The drugs were hidden in shipping containers labeled as agricultural equipment, destined for a warehouse on the outskirts of town. "This is our chance," Paul said excitedly during a briefing. "If we intercept that shipment, we can deal a massive blow to Monroe's organization. But timing is critical. We need to act fast." Maya volunteered to lead the operation, knowing how high the stakes were. Disguised as a logistics coordinator, she infiltrated the warehouse where the shipment was scheduled to arrive. Her heart raced as she navigated the dimly lit corridors, careful not to draw suspicion. Workers bustled around her, unloading crates and stacking boxes without paying her much attention. She slipped a tracking device onto one of the containers before slipping away unnoticed. Back at headquarters, Maya and her team monitored the container's movements using GPS technology. When it arrived at a secluded dockside facility, they sprang into action. Armed with warrants and backup from local law enforcement, they raided the location, catching Monroe's men off guard. Inside the containers, they found not only cocaine but also stacks of counterfeit currency and encrypted laptops containing incriminating data. The raid made headlines across the country, further eroding Monroe's influence. As evidence mounted against him, several of his top lieutenants turned state's witness, eager to save themselves from lengthy prison sentences. Their testimonies painted a damning picture of Monroe's involvement in organized crime, implicating him in everything from bribery to murder. Monroe fought back fiercely, hiring expensive lawyers and launching smear campaigns to discredit the investigation. He accused the FBI of fabricating evidence and violating his rights, attempting to sway public opinion in his favor. But Maya and her team remained vigilant, countering every move he made with solid proof of his wrongdoing. Finally, the day came when Monroe was arrested. Federal agents stormed his mansion early in the morning, finding him seated at his dining table sipping coffee as if nothing was wrong. When they read him his rights, he laughed bitterly, muttering something about betrayal under his breath. As they led him away in handcuffs, Maya watched from a safe distance, her expression unreadable. Justice felt bittersweet. She had achieved what she set out to do, but the scars left behind by Monroe's actions ran deep. With Monroe behind bars, the community began to heal. Lawmakers introduced new legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in policing, inspired in part by Maya's case. Training programs emphasized de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity, while independent oversight committees were established to review complaints against officers. Progress was slow, but it was progress nonetheless. Maya attended rallies and community meetings, sharing her story and urging others to keep pushing for change. She spoke passionately about the importance of unity and perseverance, reminding everyone that systemic issues required collective effort to address. People listened, not because she was famous, but because her words carried weight. She had walked the walk, proving that standing up for what was right could make a difference. Late. One evening, as Maya sat alone in her apartment reflecting on everything that had happened, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus, her brother. "Proud of you, sis, you've done so much good." A smile spread across her face as she read the words. Despite all the challenges she had faced, she felt a sense of peace knowing she had made a positive impact. The fight wasn't over, not completely. There would always be battles to wage, injustices to confront, and systems to reform. But for now, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had faced danger, endured pain, and stood firm in the face of adversity, and she had emerged stronger than ever, ready to take on whatever came next. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Maya closed her eyes, imagining a future where equality and justice weren't just ideals, but realities. That vision kept her going, driving her forward even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. Whatever tomorrow held, she knew she would face it with courage, and with the unwavering belief that change was possible. Months had passed since Victor Monroe's arrest, and the world seemed to breathe a little easier. His empire, once untouchable, lay in ruins, dismantled piece by piece through Maya Johnson's relentless pursuit of justice. The headlines that once celebrated his wealth and influence now painted him as a criminal mastermind, whose reign of corruption had finally come to an end. But for Maya, the victory was tempered by the knowledge that the fight against systemic injustice was far from over. The community of Pinecrest had changed too. People who had once feared speaking out began to raise their voices, demanding reforms and accountability. Town hall meetings became platforms for discussion, with residents sharing stories of discrimination and calling for action. Local leaders listened, drafting policies aimed at improving trust between law enforcement and the community. Officers attended mandatory training sessions on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques, while independent oversight boards were formed to review complaints against police misconduct. Maya played an active role in these efforts, attending meetings and offering guidance based on her experiences. She spoke not just as a survivor, but as someone who understood the complexities of law enforcement from both sides. Her words carried weight, inspiring others to join the movement for change. "We can't fix everything overnight," she often said, "but every step forward matters." Despite the progress, Maya knew there were still challenges ahead. Systemic racism and corruption weren't problems unique to Pinecrest. They existed across the country, embedded in institutions that resisted change. Still, she believed that small victories could lead to bigger ones. If one town could transform itself, so could others. One evening, Maya stood on the steps of the courthouse where Ryan Blake's trial had taken place. A crowd had gathered to celebrate the passage of new legislation inspired by her case. Lawmakers beamed as they addressed the audience, praising Maya for her courage and resilience. Protest signs waved in the air, bearing messages like "Justice prevails" and "Equality for all." The atmosphere was electric, filled with hope and determination. As Maya stepped up to the podium, the cheers grew louder. She raised a hand to quiet the crowd, her expression calm but resolute. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today, speaking to all of you about justice and reform. When I was shot that night, I thought my story might end there. But instead it became part of something much bigger, a movement for change." She paused, scanning the faces of the people before her. Some clutched candles, others held hands, united by a shared vision of a better future. What happened to me wasn't just about one officer or one incident. It was about a system that allowed prejudice and fear to dictate actions. It was about power being misused and lives being devalued. And it was about the need for us to stand together and say, "Enough." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. "We've made progress," she continued. "New laws have been passed, training programs have been improved, and communities are starting to heal. But this is just the beginning. Real change requires constant effort. It means holding our leaders accountable, supporting those who are marginalized, and refusing to settle for anything less than equality." When Maya finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. People chanted her name, thanking her for her bravery and leadership. For a moment, she allowed herself to bask in the warmth of their gratitude. But deep down, she knew the work wasn't done. Not yet. Later that night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The scars on her shoulder served as a reminder of the pain she had endured. But they also symbolized her strength. She had faced danger, betrayal, and fear, emerging stronger with each challenge. Yet she couldn't help but think about the countless others who hadn't been as fortunate, those whose stories had ended in tragedy without receiving justice. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Agent Paul Dawson. "Great job today. You're making a difference." Maya smiled faintly, typing a quick reply. "Thanks, Paul. We're just getting started." The next morning, Maya returned to work, ready to tackle whatever came next. Her team greeted her, warmly, congratulating her on the success of the rally. They were already planning their next operation, targeting another syndicate suspected of exploiting vulnerable communities. Maya threw herself into the preparations, reviewing files, analyzing data, and strategizing with her colleagues. There was always more to do, more battles to fight. One day, as she walked through the bustling streets of Atlanta, Maya noticed a group of children playing basketball in a nearby park. Their laughter echoed through the air, filling her with a sense of hope. These kids deserved to grow up in a world where they felt safe, valued, and empowered. That vision kept her going, driving her to push harder and aim higher. Maya also spent time mentoring young activists, many of whom looked up to her as a role model. She met with them regularly, sharing advice and encouragement. "Don't let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter," she told them during one session. "Change starts with people like you, people who care enough to speak up and take action." Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Over time, Maya became a national figure, invited to speak at conferences, universities, and rallies across the country. She used these opportunities to amplify the voices of others, shining a light on issues that often went overlooked. Her advocacy extended beyond policing reform, touching on topics like education equity, healthcare access, and economic opportunity. Through it all, Maya remained grounded, staying true to her roots and her purpose. She visited Marcus often, finding comfort in his unwavering support. Together, they reflected on how far they had come and how much farther they still had to go. "You've inspired so many people," Marcus told her one afternoon as they sat on her porch, "including me." Maya smiled softly, leaning back in her chair. "It's not about me," she replied. "It's about what we can achieve together." None of this would have been possible without everyone fighting alongside me. As the months turned into years, Maya's impact continued to grow. Laws changed, attitudes shifted, and communities healed. While racism and corruption still existed, they no longer operated unchecked. People were paying attention, holding institutions accountable, and working toward a fairer society. One evening, as Maya watched the sunset from her balcony, she thought about the road she had traveled. From the night she was shot to the moment she stood on the courthouse steps addressing a cheering crowd, every step had shaped her into the person she was today. She had faced darkness and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to leave the world better than she found it. And as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Maya felt a quiet sense of peace. The journey wasn't over, not completely, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. With courage, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of justice, she would keep moving forward, one step at a time.